Good afternoon. I would like to take this opportunity to welcome you to the tentative budget meeting this Monday, July 24th, 2023. Florida Statute 200.065, Parent 2, Parent E states that the School Board of Sarasota County, Florida, will soon consider a budget for the 2023-2024 school year. A public hearing to make a decision on the budget and taxes will be held on August 1st, 2023 at 1980 Landings Boulevard, Sarasota, Florida. During such discussion, the governing body shall hear comments regarding the proposed millage rate. The general public shall be allowed to speak and to ask questions prior to adoption of any measures by the governing body. The governing body shall adopt its tentative or final millage rate prior to adopting its tentative or final budget. Please stand for our flag salute. Thank you. Sorry, it was a unique order. I wanted to ask the board members, our administrative assistant, Mrs. Tompkins, had mentioned there was going to be a bit of a shift. Item number 1 currently is the approval of the Sarasota County Schools mental health assistance allocation. However, we will be, if without objection, moving that to the last item of new business so that we can start with presentations of the superintendent's tentative budget. If there aren't any objections, that would just be the start of today's business. I don't see any issue. So the new business item is to be at the bottom of the agenda after the budget items. Let's see here. So we will start with the presentation of the superintendent's tentative budget, presentation of the fiscal 2023-2024 tentative budget. Mrs. Penner or Mr. Connor?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. At this time, we're going to have our CFO, Bonnie Penner, come and do a short presentation around this year's tentative budget.
I'm seeing red. Can you hear me? I'm always scared to.
Yep. Test 1 2.
Did you see that, Stan?
Okay. Okay, thank you. So, good afternoon. Today, the purpose of today's meeting is to present the budget advertisements as are required via TRIM for approval to advertise. And first, just let me mention, you all should have had this budget book delivered to you. We have some ladies who have been working very, very diligently to get that all in order. The budget book is posted currently to the agenda on the website. This budget book is what we are anticipating to be approved on August 1, so Tuesday's meeting. Once it's approved at Tuesday's meeting, then it will be posted on the finance page as the approved tentative budget. But I wanted to make sure everybody knew that this is posted and available on the agenda. I want to bring attention, you all have a sheet that has been added in, page 39. We found an error. So you have a revised sheet. Actually, I think Ms. Tompkins put it on your desk versus actually putting it in the book. Yes, that's it. So that's the one change that has been made to the published book, and it will also be added to the agenda and updated, and then in the book as it gets posted after August the 1st. I do want to bring attention to the back of the book, starting on page 204. You don't have to go there necessarily now. Specifically for Mrs. Rose, those are some of the school's budgets. It's kind of our first draft of what the school-by-school dollar value as well as individual personnel allocations so that you can see those. You're welcome. We are continuing to update that so we can get some more specifics. We just need a little bit of work to be done on the back end of our system. So with that, I've just got a very, very short presentation to talk to you about the budget ads and what you're seeing in them that may be a little bit different than what we have already discussed. So again, today on the 24th, we are asking you to approve that we advertise the budget. We received the second calculation, which incorporates our revised property values, and the Department of Education then sets the required local effort, which we are then required to incorporate in the budget and advertise. So you have the advertisements as part of this packet. And with that, again, we will advertise on Saturday, and then on Tuesday, we will have a public hearing that will start at 5:15, where we will hear any comments in relation to the tentative millage and budget, and then submit them for approval. The final budget will then be the same scenario with no advertisement. It will, or I shouldn't say that, no advertisement in the paper, because you'll get the advertisements on your property tax notice that will advertise the date of September 18th for the final budget approval. So the difference is the important information that we wait diligently for on the 19th are the new millage rates. So the required local effort was set by the Department of Education. It is lower than the millage rate that was set last year. Last year, we had a total required required levy of 3.024 mils. This year, it has decreased and it is 2.932 mils, which is a reduction of 0.092 in the levy. We have 3 additional millages that we levy: the voted operating, which is our referendum. That's going to remain the same at 1 mil. Discretionary operating millage is 0.748, also is the same as it has been in the prior year for several years, actually. Capital outlay millage, also we are recommending the 1.5 mils, which is the same as it has been in the prior year, same as it has been for several years. So what does this mean for our regular taxpayers? The total millage that we are levying, or we are proposing for Sarasota County Schools, is 6.18 mils, which is down from 6.272 in the previous year. So a normal taxpayer could expect to see $618 in school taxes for every $100,000 of taxable value. This is a decrease of $9.20 per, I know, we'll take what we can get, $9.20 per $100,000 of taxable value. So what you're going to ask then is, why are we advertising a notice of tax increase if we're actually proposing a levy that is less than what it was last year? Well, last year we levied this under item C after the Value Adjustment Board met. We levied $592 million for our total millage levy. This year, because property values have increased, we've got houses that are selling for a higher value than they were sitting on the tax rolls. We have new construction, and we have increases to property values. So because of that, even though we're levying a lower amount, we are going to generate more revenue. So we're going to actually generate $666,000, almost 667, not thousand, $1 million from that 6.18 mils. So you can see that, again, despite the fact that we're lowering the levy, because the property values in Sarasota have increased, we are actually going to realize more revenue. So that's why we are required, this is part of the trim ad that gets to be a little bit confusing, or the trim law that gets to be a little bit confusing, is that we are required to advertise this notice of tax increase, despite in reality lowering the millage. So I wanted to also show, this is an excerpt from our property appraiser's webpage. And just to mention here, you can see that there are some factors that come into play when you're looking at your tax bill. And this down at the bottom talks about the Save Our Homes Amendment, which caps the amount that property appraiser can assess or reassess your value if you are homesteaded at 3%. And if you're a non-homesteaded property owner, it is capped at 10% based on Amendment 1. So one of the calls that we get where folks get a little confused, and they're people that have done their due diligence, they've bought a new piece of property, and they see what last year's tax bill was. Well, last year's tax bill was when they did not own that property, and it maybe has sat under this Save Our Homes 3% cap for years and years and years. So you finally buy this piece of property, but you pay market value, well, then it gets reassessed. So that comparing it to the previous property owner's tax bill sometimes leads to the thought that you are actually paying higher property taxes. So make sure you work with somebody at the property appraiser's office, so when you buy that piece of property, you understand what that new value is going to be. So if you remember last year, we had a bit of a surprise as far as the increase in property values when we got to this time of year. Just wanted to mention that the budget that we presented on June 6th included an estimate of our increase of 14.3%. The final valuation actually increased by 14.23%. So we actually had to pull back just a tiny bit in the budget, but we were a lot closer, so we like no surprises when it comes to budgeting. So that is it. Again, today is just approving to advertise. Next week is the important meeting where you will be approving the millage rates and the tentative budget.
Well, I don't see any comments or any cues. Thank you, Mrs. Penner. I know you guys work really hard. I know even though it's a decrease, it's a much slighter decrease. That's pretty impressive, by the way, by a tenth of, that's a 1/100th of a point. So
Very
thank
close.
you. A testament to the hard work that you guys do. So thank you to you and the finance department for all your work. Are there any other comments or questions? All right.
Thank
Mr. Connor,
you.
If there's anything else? Okay, very good. All right, so that concludes the superintendent's tentative budget report. We'll move on to the hearing of citizens. I have one card, and the speaker will be permitted 3 minutes to speak. When the timer flashes yellow, 1 minute remains, and you'll need to begin to summarize. Please stop when the buzzer rings. Please note that respect for divergent viewpoints and civility will be shown at every board meeting. Whether you agree or disagree with the speaker, please listen politely and respectfully without making any sounds of approval or disapproval. I will say, per statute 1001.372, parent 3, anyone causing a disruption will first be given a warning, and if that conduct does not stop, you will be asked to be removed from the chambers, but I do not believe we'll have any issue there. And the only speaker is Julie Barrett. Excuse me.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. I was under the impression that the mental health portion would be at the beginning of the agenda, so my comments are in relation to that, which is yet to come. My name is Julie Barrett. I am a recent immigrant from the separate country of Washington State. I am a mother of 4 children, all of whom went through public schools in Washington State. One of the main reasons we moved to Florida was because of the way our parental rights were infringed upon in Washington, primarily through public programs in the public schools, including mental health services. I was very concerned in looking at today's agenda and reading about the MHAA plans and felt compelled to come and comment today. Mental health cares in schools is a very slippery slope. While I'm the first to admit we need to have mental health services available to our children and their families, I do not believe it should be through our public school system. The model through this system is intentionally designed to circumvent parents and teach the children through models such as SEL, queer theory, social justice, and more. Most of these counselors and mental health providers are trained to encourage students to keep important information from parents. A year ago, I learned that my 9th grade daughter on the autism spectrum had been using a boy's name and male pronouns at school. The school psychologist is the one who encouraged her to do so when she remarked about her confusion about the other students in her special needs class changing their names and pronouns. I found out by accident. My daughter and the entire school staff had been calling her this other name. This is mental health care in public schools. This is not helpful to children or families. It creates more confusion, more anxiety and depression, and it destroys the relationship between parent and child. I see the large budget attached to this mental health program for the district, and it is gravely concerning to me. Adding these mental health services as part of our educational system has the potential and likelihood to exclude parents from these very important services. I know you probably all have the best interests of our children at heart, and I hope that you will dig deeper into this and what it will mean for our students and their families. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 3. Is there a motion? Is it all read items? We're on the following proposed millage rates, the 2023, be accepted for advertising.
I move for acceptance of the proposed millage rates for advertising.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second that the following proposed millage rates for 2023 be accepted for advertising in accordance with requirement of Chapter 200.065 of the Florida statutes. To read these out, just for clarification before final adoption. General voted operating, 1.00 mils. General local required effort, 2.932 mils. General local discretionary, 0.748 mils. Capital outlay, 1.500 mils. Total millage, 6.180. There's a motion and a second. Are there any additional comments? Seeing none, please vote on the motion before you. If you don't get a computer indication, and I did, and I just want to note, Mr. Enos is not with us today, so it'll be the 4 of us. And I don't think, Mr. Connor, you vote. I've never seen that before, so. And I'm waiting. For me. Always. I know. I'm just kidding. That's okay. And the motion to adopt, that the motion to propose the millage rates for 2023 be accepted for advertising, it passes 4-0. Moving on to the next item of new business, the tentative budget for 23-24 be approved for advertising. Is there a motion?
I move for approval of the tentative budget for advertising.
I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
A motion, a second. Are there any comments? Seeing none, I'm just going to make it very briefly. I won't be supporting this. I've spoken with Mr. Connor, and it's a kind of a unique time when having a superintendent come in at this point. There's a lot of changes, as we noted legislatively. There's a lot of things that the district has to do to really create an off-ramp from a compliance standpoint. I know that that's very, at least in my conversation with Mr. Connor, is very clear in understanding those. And these are advertisements. There's a multiple process when it comes to the final adoption through to September. But just from the posture standpoint, I hope that we can work through those things and get us to where we need to go. But for those reasons, I won't be supporting this. If there are any additional comments, please vote on the motion before you, which is to approve the tentative budget 2023-24 be approved for advertising. And I know what mine is, so. And the motion passes 3-1. Moving on to the next item of new business, the mental health, so the number 5, approval of the Sarasota County Mental Health Assistance Allocation. Is there a motion?
I move, go ahead.
I make a motion that the Sarasota County Schools Mental Health Assistant Allocation and Behavioral Health Plan for 2023 through 2024 school year be approved as presented.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Are there any comments? Mrs. Marinelli.
Yes, I would, excuse me, thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to ask our superintendent or his designee to address what our one person had on public comments about not letting parents know, and to know exactly what our comprehensive mental health plan does and does not do. And in my reading of it, the majority of it is legislation that we have to follow. And I also would just like to comment on reading that, and it has nothing to do with any staff, but I do find the legislation to be cumbersome for staff, that it requires a tremendous amount of documentation and a tremendous amount of follow-up. And yes, our students have mental health issues. That is not anything that I'm just saying. I find the requirements of what is to be done by staff to be very cumbersome, and I just want that on record. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Connor. Mrs. Marinelli, Mr. Connor, I'll leave it to you.
Thank you, Board Member Marinelli. I just want to give a brief overview of our mental health plan. State statute requires board approval and the submission to the DOE by August 1st. That's why we're presenting this to you at this moment. It is a fluid document. It's monitored frequently, and it is assessed and adjusted based on need. As you can see, we were awarded from the state $2.525 million, which is an increase of about $400,000 from last year. And a couple of the expenditures that I'll just run down in terms of the mental health plan include our contracted mental health services, the addition of 5 social workers, the decrease in the student services ratio to 1 to 400 per counselor, 1 to 1,400 per psychologist, and 1 to 1,177 per social worker. It also helps us fund our student assistance and prevention specialists, our teen court prevention services, and the addition of the family navigator position to support families with mental health needs. This also helps increase our internal professional learning for our mental health providers, and it does require that charter schools also get their portion and submit their plan prior to submission. So we have looked at all the charter school plans at this time, and so we are presenting this in accordance with state statute and FLDOE permissions. So, Ms. Jackalone, can you share a little bit about some of the parent rights and concerns that were mentioned today?
Just making sure it was on. Mandy Coker is also up here with me, just in case you all have specific questions that I'm unable to answer. Mandy Coker is our state designated mental health coordinator, and I appreciate your efforts working with the team to put the plan together for you all to review tonight. As you all know, we've stated many times, and we've worked very closely with our school board attorney to ensure that any service that we deliver to a student is under the guise of parental consent. Parents are heavily involved, and we need those as partners as we make decisions to help students progress academically. So conversations happen with the parent at the table, and no services are rendered without informed written parental consent. I'd be happy to have a conversation. I'm not familiar with the case that was shared tonight, but I'd be happy to have an individual conversation with that parent.
And I'll just add that last year's House Bill 1557 covered a lot of the concerns that were raised by the speaker. So based on Florida law, anytime there's a change in the services delivered to a student that affect their well-being requires parental consent. And I know that our operations are consistent with that.
Thank you, Mr. Duggan.
Mrs. Marinelli.
No, I was just thanking him for that.
You're recognized.
Thank you. Could you also address the issue of, I know that everything you do requires parental permission.
Correct.
So what is documented by the district as required? And if a student or their parent, they're referred for outside services, does the district have anything to do with the documentation that is required from that agency that the parent voluntarily gets help?
So if I'm understanding your question, so whenever services are rendered on our school sites, parents sign for permission for those services to be delivered to their child. If a parent wants to partner with an outside agency that we have an agreement with, we also get consent for referral and consent for those services. At that time, the agency takes over that case, and they work out with the parent what information is shared back and forth through a release of information.
So what kind of, just for public, what does the Student Services Department require for information after you get the parental consent? What kind of information, student information, is asked for with parental permission?
Maybe you know that answer better.
Sure. So whenever a student is referred for mental health therapy for an outside agency, even if the services are provided on campus, parents are first given a consent form that's signed that just identifies on it their student's name, the agency that they would be referred to, and they sign that, yes, I consent for my child to be referred to this agency. The only thing that's provided to that agency is that signed document that says, here you go, this is a copy of the signed consent. From that point on, there is no information exchanged from any Sarasota County School District employee about a student to that agency. All the communication or information exchanged about personal information happens from the parent directly to that agency.
Okay, because I thank you for.
Is that what you're looking for?
Yeah,
Okay.
because that has been brought up, that we are sharing, the district is sharing confidential information to outside agencies without parental consent. So I'm just trying to make that clear to the public that that is not what the district is doing.
You are 100% correct. And just to add on to that, because what then also happens is the school, if the parent signs what's called a release of information with that agency, then the agency can discuss educationally relevant information with the school, but that can only occur if the parent signs a release of information stating that this agency and the school can communicate back and forth.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Rose.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question just for clarification for the public. There's a lot of, as you are very well aware, talk about mental health and social emotional learning and such. Are there any data collection that we store on children relative to a committee coming together and assessing a child for any reason whatsoever, from bullying to safety to services? Is there any bank where data is collected and shared for any reason through curriculum, through assessment, or through surveys? Is there any data collection on individual children in our school system that is stored and shared?
So I can only speak to my my lens of what I am aware of. So the only thing that we have to report to the state. So legislatively, we are required to report to the state how many mental health referrals are made annually by each school, and out of those referrals, how many students receive services. So internally, we document that information. It is not sent out or provided out to anyone except our own internal employees who are ensuring that we have that information to report to the state. Does that answer your question?
That answers my question. When we report to the state, are we reporting anything more than numbers? Are
No.
we report just?
No, and it is a comprehensive number, so it's within the entire district, how many students within the entire district were referred for mental health therapy, and out of those students, how many students receive services.
And I know at one point when I was a middle school principal, there was one sensitive survey that was given annually, and it required parent permission, but I don't think we give it anymore. Are we giving any surveys that ask students to answer personal information?
The student services team does not administer any surveys to students.
Okay. I think that's real important, and perhaps we might want to cite that, just food for thought, to Superintendent Connor on our student services site, because there is a growing exchange out in the community that either our curriculum or our resources, or in some fashion, we're collecting data on students, banking it, and sharing it. And I'm hearing from you that that is absolutely not the case, and that any data that we give to anybody is the state, and it's not names or information, it's numbers.
That is 100% correct.
Okay, thank you. That's real important. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
Thank you. If I heard you correctly, Mr. Connor, it was about $2.5 million that we received for the state for mental health services. I just looked up in our booklet that we got here of 48,000 and change of students. I did a quick math calculation that translates to about $51 and change per student. And I know Ms. Jackalone and I have had these conversations many times, that is a very small amount of money that's allocated to 48,000 students, and for the most part, that money gets geared towards students who are in crisis, and that's where the money is spent, and I've been here for a little over 2 years. I have yet to find a situation, whether it's curriculum or books or mental health, where we have circumvented a parent and administered any service. I can't find one. I ask that question at almost every meeting because of public comments, and I just want to reiterate that my commitment to the mental wellness of our students, because that enables them to achieve academic excellence, and I wish we got more than $2.5 million, quite frankly.
Thank you. Mrs. Marinelli, I have you up next. I just wanted to follow up on some questions before we move on. Just for clarification, we don't ever take, and this, I know we talk about this all the time, so I do think it is important we have clarity, and so forgive me. I know there is the difference between clinical services, and that's really like the trigger that changes a lot of different things, which we do not offer clinical services on site. Well, that's not true. Can you clarify when and who for clinical services so there's clarity?
Absolutely. So the only people who would provide therapeutic or clinical services to our students would be an outside agency. Now, those outside agencies that we have interagency agreements with are able to come onto campus to work with students, but it is not provided by any Sarasota County School Board employee. No Sarasota County School Board employee provides mental health therapy or therapeutic services.
And this is kind of, bear with me. Yeah. So in all of the interagency agreements, there's a process within the contract or provisions within the contract that require parental consent prior to any services being rendered.
Yes, and we have district procedures that anytime a student is even being considered to possibly be referred, that parental consent is the first thing that has to happen.
Okay, and so an intake form, is that ever an intake form provided from it when and again, this could be broadly termed.
No, so any type of quote-unquote intake would never be provided, one, by a Sarasota County School Board employee. What would happen is, if it's determined that a student would be referred for mental health therapy, the first thing that happens is the parent is contacted. We meet with the parent, and the parent is already aware of kind of like the concerns or what's going on, because within our multi-tiered system of support, our school-based staff are, within our procedures, providing interventions for that student. So they're trying to work with the student in a level of not therapeutic, but just providing additional support to that student. So they're already aware that, hey, we are providing interventions internally, and there may be a little bit more support that's needed. So when that happens and that conversation occurs, the first thing that happens is we meet with the parent. If the parent signs consent, again, the consent form is given to the agency. If the parent signed consent, any intake, any assessments that would be provided to that student happen between the agency and the student and the family.
And that's on our site or off our site?
That would just depend on the clinical, whomever's providing that therapeutic service. So if the parent arranges for that intake meeting, oftentimes they'll arrange to have it occur on campus, and they'll meet the therapist on campus to do that.
Okay. And then I lost my train of thought. when there is a referral made and services, there's an option, so there's a consent form signed and a referral is made to an outside agency, is there any, how is payment structured, and do we get involved in that?
So there is no money exchanged between a family and ourselves with any type of therapeutic support. Any agency that we would refer to, meaning we, Sarasota County School Board employee, would only happen with an agency that we already have an interagency agreement with. Part of the interagency agreement is there is no money exchanged.
Okay, so there's no Medicare, because in the, and I can't pull it up because I already have the voting queue, but when I was reading it, in there it says, and this is kind of is boilerplate language coming from the state that says to optimize the MHAAP to utilize Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera. So we do not take, we don't engage in any of those.
Our
Sarasota
staff,
County Schools.
our staff can bill for services that are Medicaid reimbursable. That would be like our counselors, our psychologists. There's a list of things that are eligible for reimbursement. We follow that list. We have a Medicaid supervisor who oversees that process. Agencies can bill Medicaid with parental consent if the parent agrees to that.
Okay, there's a longer conversation in here, but the final question I have is, and there's a couple different things, but you said that from a survey standpoint, and there's a lot of the word survey, and I with intention is, I'm thinking, and I think the average folk would think, a survey that's a piece of paper that you fill, like, how are you feeling today? I'm feeling good. What did you eat for breakfast today? So first, you said student services does not administer any surveys. Does anyone administer any surveys?
So I said that because I cannot.
Because that's, you know, your
I mean, I don't think so, but when it's like other departments, like,
I just want to be clear. I made me think it. You know, the world would be listening
I'm
to
aware
that.
that the annual student climate survey is administered, but that is with parental consent. That is the only survey district-wide that I'm aware of, but our department, for myself, Chris, you might have something more? Okay, and that's for students in grades 6 through 12 with parental consent is the annual climate survey.
And we get to see a copy of the questions
Yes.
right after the fact, not before. And then I
actually think
thank you for bearing with me. The one aspect is I just had it. I think I might have lost it. Check-ins. Check-ins, is that considered a survey?
like
When you check in with a
checking
student
out
at the
with
beginning of the
student.
school, is that considered a survey?
That is not a survey, but with that being said, when we check in and out with a student, prior to beginning that, a parent would receive what's called a notice of intervention because that's considered a tier 2 intervention for a student.
Okay.
So the parent would be notified that this is an intervention that's occurring. Along with any intervention comes that frequent parental feedback. So we're checking in and out with the student. We're going to be reporting back to the parent in X amount of time that's identified on that notice of intervention to report back to them how the student is responding to that intervention.
Okay, thank you. And I'll close with, I know Mr. Edwards mentioned 2.5 million of this. This is the state, but that's by no means the limit of what Sarasota County Schools is funding when it comes to mental health services. It's well and above 7 figures, I believe. It's in here, but this is only specific to the state funding. Mr. Connor, I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, through the chair, this is a specific categorical, but by no means is comprehensive in meeting all of our needs in terms of mental health.
Thank you. And Mrs. Marinelli, sorry to engage me, sir. Indulge me in those questions. Go ahead.
I believe the survey that Ms. Rose was talking about used to be administered through our safe and drug-free schools. The youth survey,
The youth risk behavior survey.
the at-risk behavior.
Correct.
That is no longer.
No, ma'am.
That's the one that caused a lot of angst. So that is no more.
Yeah, we did not
I know,
administer that.
yeah,
last
student
year.
services never administered that.
Correct.
That came from the health section of the organization. But I just wanted, that was the at-risk youth survey, but that is no longer done. But student services never had
Correct.
a part in that. So, and I guess also, there's a difference between certification
Licensure.
by the Florida Department of Education and licensure. Licensure, counselors, psychologists, social workers are not licensed to provide therapeutic services in the school setting. That is where the outside people come in. And I know we've said this many times, and I do feel like I know what I'm talking about on this one. And when I was a school counselor and the administrator for student services, we always made that quite clear, that it was not therapeutic services, that the counselors, psychologists, social workers provided services in the school setting that had to do with academics for the child so they can be successful. And I think where a lot of all of this is happening too are the words social emotional learning, and how to differentiate of what the school system does and what is perceived that the school system does. So the school system's part is to that mental health piece for students who are experiencing any kind of emotional or social issue, to work with that within the framework of being successful in the school setting. That is the big difference. And that gets all messed up, and it gets dumped on the school district because of the word social emotional learning. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, that was perfect. Like you said, the goal of any school psychologist, school social worker, school counselor is to identify, what barrier is impeding on the student accessing their education, and that is what's driving their intervention.
Thank you so much. Are there any more comments before? I want to thank you, and I feel like you guys regularly get a firing squad. I mean, the fact of the matter is that you are overseeing a hotly discussed and debated realm of services that are very important and have the opportunity to provide incredible resources, but also have a lot of risk attached to it. And I said something before that no educator does anything wrong. I would say that overwhelmingly, I don't think that anyone's that our teachers overwhelmingly are not, or staff are not looking to impose any kind of negative impact on a family or a student. I think that we have this responsibility in our realm, or role, as a board and board members, to kind of toe that line and make sure we have proper checks and balances. And I know you guys regularly answer these questions, and I appreciate that. I think the hardest part, and Mr. Connor and I were talking about this before, and I was talking to members of the Department of Education for this, because it is a challenge for me, speaking as an individual board member, that words change, and that they feel like they get co-opted, and then we're in the middle of how do we discern this is what it's the well-intended mental health services within the limited scope of a public school district, which we understand there are going to be those services that are required, that are needed. But how do we walk that line in the appropriate fashion so that we don't overstep that line? And I'm sorry to say it, and this is not directed at either of you that I'm familiar with. But that unfortunately there have been certain organizations and agencies across the state and maybe across different states that have abused that, and it's put a lot of people in public education on a defensive situation, and we have to walk that back. And so it's uncomfortable, but I will not sit here and say that's never happened. I will not say it's never happened in our school district. I don't know that it was an intentional negligence, but we have had certain circumstances that we had to evaluate processes and improve upon them. And so it's not just fodder, but it is serious. And I think for me it's challenging because my understanding. And again, as I go back to the budget, and I said, I want to see us as we go through this process, hopefully find an off-ramp so we can be in compliance and still provide those services and have clarity of what these words mean that line up with those services. But social emotional learning, my understanding is that it's not something that the state of Florida is utilizing, and that we're more focused on resiliency toolkit and all of those elements. And so when we look at the words, even to be fair, the document that we have to complete to the state and includes language. And so I think it lines up. If you think a lot of these were adopted and effective July 1st, we're at July 24th. And so there's a reality of agency taking some time to catch up. And so we are doing that same thing. And But for those reasons, I share this, I'm not supporting this for now for all those reasons. But I will tell you, I think it's important that we try to figure out these in the most simple, without kind of going round and round and round, and not pretending that there's nothing for anyone to be concerned about, because I just don't think we get anywhere that way. But also being very honest with ourselves about, this is what we offer, this is what we don't, and then if anyone knows anything other than that, we are always in a continuous improvement opportunity. But the language is what makes us all, I think, go crazy. But I appreciate you guys always candidly answering the questions. It is frustrating, and I know I shared this previously, and my hope is so that in the next, 2.5 months, that we can figure it all out. And maybe there'll be a new word that's a taboo word at that point. But I think it comes down to, at the end of it, is making sure we stay within our guardrails of what we are allowing and offering as a school district, and we don't compromise. And I believe the overwhelming majority of all of our staff would never compromise that. And so I hope you can appreciate where I'm coming from. So thank you for that. Mr. Edwards.
Thank you. I just also want to share in the hotbed topic that you guys live in every single day. And you do not just a great job, an outstanding job of navigating that. And I can't stress that enough. Where I'm on your page is I'm not concerned, honestly, about any other county, any other state. I am concerned about our students and our parents and our teachers. So I so appreciate that you and we stay on that page. And that I know that in the event that someone makes a mistake or deliberately breaks or goes off kilter, we have mechanisms in place that jump in and rectify that situation. People are people that way. So I'm confident. Because so far, in the tenure that I've been here, I have yet to find a parent that has not been involved. And every educator from the time I've been, not just here, is that family engagement in education is the way to go 100% of the time, and we do that. And I can't thank you enough for that work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for all those. Are there any other additional comments? Mrs. Marinelli, final thought.
I understand what you were saying, Chair Ziegler, about approving this. I don't like that we are asked to approve something that doesn't have the correct verbiage from the Florida Department of Education. That has nothing to do with you guys or that I don't support, but I don't like being put in the position that I'm asked to approve something that doesn't have the proper verbiage. I think that lends itself for the whole district to open itself up for a lot of criticism. So I'm leaning towards voting against it only because the language does not match what you are saying that you're going to be doing. I don't know what it means if voting against it. Does it hold things up? We don't get the money. Okay, well, that's a big problem then. All right, well then I will vote for it, but I want it on record that I do not agree that the language does not match what we are to do as a district, because I will not hold up any funds that's going to affect a student. Thank you.
Mrs. Rose?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be supporting this. I'm just going to take it down to brass tacks. We are following the law as it is legislated by the Florida Department of Education, the legislature, and what we are voting for today is required of us to fulfill, and that is in order to get the $2 million+ to support our children. And all of the services that we are offering can be defined as supporting a student in the academic environment. Any therapeutic services are offered only by outside agencies.
That is correct.
So, in order for us to have our students reading at grade level, which is my highest priority, I will support this with great enthusiasm because it supports their academic achievement success in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no additional comments, I will ask for each board member to vote on the motion before us, which is the approval of the Sarasota County Schools Mental Health Assistance Allocation and Behavioral Health Plan for the 2023-2024 school year.
Did we do a motion?
It's been so long that Mrs. Tompkins or Mr. Duggan did, yes, we believe, yes, there's a motion and a second. But thank you for that clarification. So the motion to approve the Sarasota County Schools Mental Health Assistance Allocation and Behavioral Health Plan for the 23-2024 school year passes 3-1. Moving on to comments. The public hearing to adopt tentative millage and budget meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, August 1st, 2023 at 5:15 p.m., followed by a regular board meeting at 6 p.m. If there are there any additional comments, questions, statements? Seeing none, without objection, we stand adjourned.